Hey there, this is Pete Pardo from Sea of Tranquility, www.seaoftranquility.org, your web destination for all forms of heavy metal, progressive rock, jazz, fusion. We cover it all. Today is Sunday, March the 5th, and here to do a little something a little different. Normally we do this regular thing called What's Hot, talking about new releases and such like that. And we're going to start doing a new kind of series where I'm just going to rant about some stuff that's on my mind and things that I just want to talk to you all about and get off my chest. You know what I'm saying? So one of the things that, God, for as long as I can remember, that's really irked me and seemingly is getting no better is the kind of sad state of rock radio, more specifically classic rock radio here in the U.S. In addition to kind of like this fickleness of rock fans, and I'm going to say older rock fans. So figure I'm talking to you. If you're 45 to like 70, you're who I'm talking about here. This particular audience who just seems to only want to hear the hits of the bands they like, whether it be on the radio, on satellite radio, internet radio, or more specifically live in concert. So let's start off a little bit here. I'm going to talk specifically for a little while about classic rock radio. You know, when I was growing up, teenager in the mid-late 70s, early 80s, you know, FM rock radio was actually a pretty cool thing. You'd get a lot of stations who would play not only kind of the classic songs from a lot of these bands popular at the time, but, you know, when that band or artist would come out with a new album was back in the day, okay, 8-track, album, cassette, no CDs back in the late 70s, early 80s. When they came out with a new album and maybe did a tour, you know, these record stations would go and promote the new music. They would say, hey, you know, Deep Purple, or Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, whoever it might be, Black Sabbath, have a new album coming out. Here's a brand new track off that album, and boom, you'd hear it. And you'd be like, wow, that's great. If you liked it, what would you do? You go down, hop in your car, or have your parents drive you to the local record shop, or, you know, the department store, and you'd pick up a copy of the LP, right? That's how it worked back then. Radio was responsible for making sure that the new music from all the popular bands got promoted, so people would then go out and buy the albums, right? So somewhere along the way, you know, and the great thing is that that's how, you know, there was no internet back in the day, so that's how we actually found out about new music, by listening to radio. Growing up here in the Hudson Valley of New York, you know, there was actually, and they're still around, but there was a great local radio station that did that all the time. So you'd hear like great new stuff from all these, you know, new and classic bands, and that's how we would go out and find new music. This particular radio station, I'm not going to name them, that's not really necessary, you know, these days plays like a selection of maybe 100 songs, right? Over and over and over again. So, you know, what's the point when all you're going to hear is Hotel California, Stairway to Heaven, Walk This Way, Sweet Emotion, you know, Jumpin' Jack Flash, so on and so forth, Tom Sawyer, you know all the songs, all great songs, right? But, geez, don't these bands have anything different than these same hits all the time? You know, how many times you're going to want to hear, you know, those same 2 or 3 songs from Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd? You know, how many times do you want to hear Seen All Good People by Yes? Heard them a million times. They're great tunes. They're legendary songs. But come on, there's more to those bands than just those couple of songs. That's where we're at nowadays, though, unfortunately. If you go to almost any market here in the U.S., and I travel a bit for business, so when I have a chance, if I'm in a rental car or whatever, I'll turn on the local radio stations, and they all do the same thing. So what's even more distressing, and I've heard this before, is that, you know, you get one of these classic rock stations, and they talk about a classic band and about how they've got a new album coming out, you know, and they're going to be touring. Maybe they're going to be playing locally in the area, you know. And to celebrate that, here's bam, and then they play that same song from 1975, which we've all heard a million times. I mean, this happened a couple of years ago. This local station in particular, a couple of years ago, Deep Purple put out a new album, which was very, very good, by the way. They were playing some local dates and whatnot, and they basically, this radio station, I heard them, that the DJ announced that, and here's Highway Star. No, that's not the way it's supposed to work. You're supposed to, when you're announcing a brand new album from a legacy classic band, you should play a song off that album, not play the shit that we've heard a million times already. Again, no knock on the old stuff, okay? It's legendary for a reason. But how are these bands how are they gonna sell new studio material without the help of radio, right? So, there's this pretty cool thing called satellite radio. So, many of you probably have Sirius XM, right? Pretty cool. On there, you can hear, they have all these different stations. You can hear, you just want to hear the hits by all these bands, you could certainly do that. But, they got cool stations like, Deep Tracks, vintage vinyl, all that kind of stuff where you actually can listen and hear. It's like, wow, there's that kind of deep album cut by, whoever, Uriah Heep, Grand Funk Railroad, Robin Trower, Frank Marino, Zeppelin, whatever the case, so something more than what you would normally hear every old day of the week. So that's kind of cool. But, you got to wonder, it's like, when is someone going to come out with, whether it's internet radio or satellite or, regular FM radio, come out with a station that's targeted towards people like you or me who want to hear a lot of those real rare album cuts from some of these classic bands, or better yet, new music from bands, whether they be US bands from Sweden, Norway, Germany, UK, wherever, it doesn't really matter, who maybe are putting out new music that's in the vein or the style of a lot of those old bands that we love. Where are you going to hear that stuff? You're not. Unless you're following along, a website like Sea Tranquility or something similar on the internet, and you're seeing a lot of that stuff reviewed, then you go out and find it, whether you buy it on Amazon or whether you go download it or listen to it on Bandcamp or, whatever. But, you can't rely on radio to do that, right? I mean, when's someone going to, start an internet radio show where that's the kind of stuff that they target? Some of these, rare bands, I mean, even older bands from the 70s, who nobody's ever heard about. There's tons of great underground rock and roll, hard rock, prog, metal from like the 70s and the 80s that, either were signed to a major label or weren't, but nobody bought the albums, they disappeared, whatever. There's all this great stuff that's out there that just like nobody knows about. And a lot of people would really like if they would just take the time to discover and listen to it. So I don't know what the solution is, but, it's pissed me off for a long time, and I know there's other people out there like me. Unfortunately, though, there's a lot of people out there, the majority, who could give a shit, and all they want to hear is these same songs over and over and over again. It's funny. This whole discussion was kind of prompted by a talk that a good friend of mine, Sam, and I had at a recent Blue Oyster Cult show just a couple weeks ago here locally in New York, and we got into this whole discussion about how so many, aging rock fans, and I say aging, lightly. Again, I'm basically talking about folks who were like in the low to mid 40s to about 70. So people who kind of grew up listening to music during like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's basically who I'm talking about here. And, a lot of these people, it's like, they go to concerts, right? Of some of these legacy bands, and they're all fired up about it. Like, yeah, I'm such a huge fan, been a fan since the 70s, right? But then you go to the actual show, and you don't see these people getting excited about anything until they play those one or two or maybe three radio hits. The rest of the show, they're out at the back by the bar, or they're talking to their wives or friends or girlfriends or whatever, boyfriends, or just sitting on their hands and just, and it's just like, you say you're a fan, you come to the show, you're all fired up about it, you're wearing the band shirt and all that kind of stuff, and you're acting like you never heard half these songs before. I don't get it. Just don't get it. So I'm going to tell you a couple stories here. So case in point. So I don't know, about maybe 5 years ago, something like that, my wife and I went to go see Styx. They did that whole tour where they played Grand Illusion and Pieces of Eight back to back in one show, right? Never done that before. Pretty cool thing, right? Both legendary albums. For me, they're two best albums. Top to bottom, each album just filled with classic hits, hits that they released that actually did very well on singles as well as on FM radio, as well as some fantastic deep album cuts that are legendary that, maybe the band never played before. There's actually some selections on both those albums that the Styx had never played live before. So go to a venue up in the Albany area, packed with people. Again, of all ages. You got some a little bit younger, some around my age, in the 50s, and some even older. And everybody's all fired up, people drinking and just wearing their stick shirts, and everybody's just all into it, whatever. So they come on, they launch into Grand Illusion, right? First tune off that album. Everybody's into it. Then Fooling Yourself, everybody's into it. Both of those songs, big on FM radio all these years, right? They were on the Greatest Hits album, right? And all of a sudden they start to get into, the deeper album cuts that maybe weren't played live back in the day, maybe weren't on any of those few Greatest Hits sets, right? But you would think that these folks had owned the Grand Illusion album back in the day, probably, or did they listen to the whole thing back to front? I don't know. But all of a sudden you notice for each of those other songs, yeah, everybody's into it. They applaud after each one, but it's just like, you get the feeling it's like they're just waiting for Come Sail Away, right? And of course, when Come Sail Away comes up, everybody goes bonkers, gets up from their seats, dancing around, whatever, totally into it. And they get back after that song. They start playing more of the other tunes on the album. Everybody's just kind of like, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, here they go. They launch into Castle Walls, probably the best song off that album. It's like a prog and hard rock classic. I don't think they've ever played that song live before. And people are getting up and walking to the freaking bar. They're going out to take a piss break or get something to eat. I'm like, you got to be kidding me here, people. You got to be kidding me. And it's the same thing. They took a break and then they launched into Pieces of Eight. Again, people going nuts during Renegade and Blue Collar Man and whatnot. But then you have all these other great songs. Queen of Spades, for crying out loud. One of the best tunes that band has ever done. And, yay, okay. But nothing like some of the hits, people going nuts. It's like so many people, and I was literally watching around me. So many people, they just waited to get excited to like 3 or 4 songs out of that whole concert. That was it. And they treated the rest of the set as if they never even heard those songs before. So again, I question, are you really a Styx fan? And you can interchange any band here, because I've been to tons of shows where this has happened. Are you really a fan, or you just going to the show because you like those 3 or 4 songs you've heard on the radio for the last 40 years? I don't know. Okay, another story. Right around the same time, actually maybe a couple years before this Styx show, I went to see Uriah Heep in New York City at BB King's, right? So this was a big deal because they hadn't played in the States in a while, hadn't played in New York City in quite a while, and it was a big deal. It was packed, right? Triumphant return of British hard rock legends Uriah Heep. And, I happened to be, this is maybe about a quarter of the way through the show, I happened to be standing with a couple buddies of mine in between where the bar and the soundboard is, okay? Right in front of the stage, but, a little ways back. Totally getting into it. Heep has been one of my favorite bands since I was a kid. And there was this crew of guys who were pretty drunk, but getting into it for the most part. At one point I started talking to them, and they traveled many, many hours to come to this show. They were, they may have been from the DC area, but maybe from the Carolinas. I'm not really sure. They came a great deal to come to this show. And, So the early part of the set, he played a lot of those, classic tunes from the first couple albums. So the David Byron years, right? So, Gypsy and, Easy Living and all that kind of stuff, right? More popular tunes from the band back then. But then, the band actually had a couple of albums out at the time that they had just released that were probably as strong as anything they've released in 25, 30 years, right? So the band is still pumping out really good new material. Every time they went to play a new song, these guys were basically like, fuck this, we're going to the bar. And, after seeing that a couple times, I was kind of like, that's kind of not cool. So I started talking to them. And they were telling me where they were from and, why they came all the way up here and how much they love Uriah Heep, whatever. And then I said to them, well, I kept seeing that every time they play a newer song, you guys are going back to the bar. Like you're angry that they're playing that. And they're like, oh, yeah, we don't want to hear any of the new material. We just want to hear the Byron era stuff. And I'm like, well, have you heard any of the new stuff? No, not interested. It's not the same without Byron. And I'm like, but if you haven't heard it, how can you say that? It's like, well, we're only fans of the classic stuff. I'm like, but if you're a fan of the band, wouldn't you give it a chance? Not interested. These guys were just not interested in hearing what I had to say, not getting my side of it. But the funny thing is like, whenever the band that night played a lot of material, and they played a lot of really cool, deep album cuts from those old albums, right? Stuff that they've actually played a lot over the years, but not like what was on the live album or on the greatest hits album, that sort of thing, and not what was played on the radio. And so every time they would launch into one of those type of tunes, these guys had the same reaction as they did to the new stuff. And I'm thinking, well, if you proclaim to love all those old albums so much and know them back and back to front, front to back, why are you still reacting as if you never heard these songs and you could care less, even though they're on the same albums as these, Sunrise and The Magician's Birthday, all that kind of stuff. So I'm like sitting there, I'm like, are you really these hardcore fans that you're proclaiming to be, right? Or are you just like everybody else who I saw at the Stick show, who I see at like all these other shows, who really only know and care about those 3, 5 songs or whatever from all these classic artists, okay? And why are you not even trying to give any of their new music a chance? Why should you use it as a time to take a pee break or go have your 9th drink of the evening when honestly you really don't even need it, right? Pay attention to the freaking music, okay? So I'm going to end this with one last story, and this is when you go back to this Blue Oyster Cult show that my buddy Sam and I just went to see. So a lot of credit to Blue Oyster Cult. They've been around now 40 some odd years, right? They're still out there doing it. They've only got 2 original members, Buck Dharma and Eric Bloom, but the rest of the guys in the band have been there for a while. They're still playing the majority of the songs you'd want to hear, but they do a great job of going into their catalog and picking out little nuggets that the hardcore fans would like to hear. Okay, it's not necessarily 12 of their most popular songs of all time, but you know what? You're going to get like maybe 8 or 9 of those songs, plus maybe like a half a dozen kind of cool rarities and B-sides and deep album cuts that you would never expect. So on this particular night, Blue Oyster Cult played most of the mandatory stuff. Missing a couple tunes here and there I would have liked to hear, but they went into Club Ninja, and they pulled they played True Confessions off the Agent of Fortune album. Not one of my favorite songs by them, and certainly not even close to being one of the best songs from that album, but give them credit for playing it. They pulled out a couple tunes here and there also from their vast discography and whatnot. And for the most part, and again, the show was pretty crowded. There was, I wouldn't say it was sold out, but it was pretty close to it. For the most part, the majority of the people in attendance were, they were very, they were very pleasant. They clapped, whatever. But you know what? Until they played Godzilla, they didn't come to life, right? And even, when they played some of these other, really, really good songs, classic Blue Oyster Cult tunes, fans got into it. But, they were just kind of, okay, cool to be here, whatever. But then all of a sudden, right before the encore, what did they play? They played Don't Fear the Reaper. And everybody got up, went berserk, flooded to the front of the stage. You see these, like, husbands and wives who went there together, dancing and all this stuff like this was the second coming of God. I mean, for fuck's sake, people. It's a great song. Don't get me wrong. It's a legendary song. But haven't we all heard it like a million times? Is it so hard to give some of that energy back to the band for some of these other songs in the set, which are probably better? Or are you just one of the millions who go to these classic rock shows to see 2 or 3 or 4 songs? And really, is that all you know? You claim to be a fan, but are you really? That's my question. I don't know. I'm just guessing. Me, and I may be different. I may be a dinosaur. I may, you look behind you. I'm a fan, okay, of all these bands, and I go out and I buy the CDs, the albums, and I listen to them front to back. I'm not a shuffle guy on the iPod. I'm not a just want to hear the hits. I'm not a radio guy and that kind of stuff. So maybe I'm a little different, but I just don't get it. It's like if you're a fan of the band, support them, support their new music, support their old music. Listen to more than just the freaking greatest hit set. I don't get it. There's more to all these bands than just 3 or 4 songs. And it's just so frustrating to go to a concert where, you got all these people congregating who claim to be into the bands. And really, are you really into the bands? Or you just want to hear those couple songs? Because in my opinion, especially when some of these shows sell out instantly, you get a lot of people who probably would like to go, who would really like to experience it, like maybe the way I do, but can't because you got all these people who go when when they could have just sat home and listened to the freaking greatest hits set, right? So anyway, rant over. This is Pete Pardo with Sea of Tranquility. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. Check us out here on YouTube. We got a new show coming up in about 2 weeks. We're going to talk about all sorts of new stuff. We got new releases from Immolation and Overkill and Saint and Sinners and a whole lot more. So we'll see you then. Be good, be safe. Catch you on the flip side. Bye-bye.